Support for Radio Friends comes from Homestead Senior Care, providing trustworthy, kind-hearted senior home care services in your loved one's home. All caregivers are thoroughly screened, extensively trained, professional, and reliable. Homestead is all about providing the highest quality home care service to fit you and your family's needs. Plus, if you would be interested in becoming a caregiver, they offer great part-time positions. Give them a call at 573-442-4333 or check it out at homestead.com. Good morning and welcome to Radio Friends on Thursday, November 23rd. This is Thanksgiving Day. Good to have you with us, and thank you for spending a little bit of your day with us. And I've got Larry Brown, singer, songwriter, and storyteller with us. Good morning, Larry. You've got a Thanksgiving Day story, right?
Well, yes. Thanksgiving is a time of making connections.
It is. And it's been a tradition having you on Thanksgiving.
I think it is.
And the holidays. So share your Thanksgiving story, making connections.
Well, as I was saying, Thanksgiving is a time usually when we recall the past. Well, I mean, we do that personally and family, and we do it nationally as well, a time to look back and say, well, thanks for that. And that's, and my story today has to do with that. It has to do with the Thanksgiving that occurred about 30 years ago, but it was brought to my attention because of driving on the interstate highway between here and St. Louis, which I do many times. And perhaps you recall that a little bit east of Columbia on I-70 are the remains of what I think probably was a place called Nickerson Farms. They were a business that was located on primary highways, and they were known for their big red roof.
I remember that.
And they had a little restaurant inside, and they were also famous for selling local honey. Well, there's one of those. They went out of business, I think maybe by 1980 or so they were out of business. And so there's one over there decaying, eventually returning to the earth. And every time I drive by that, I remember a Thanksgiving from 30 years ago. My wife and I at that time were living down at Lake of the Ozarks, and we knew two elderly people in our community at Golden Beach that we thought might not have a place to be for Thanksgiving. Now, often my wife and I would travel, but this year we were going to be at home and thought, well, that would be nice to invite these two people over for Thanksgiving. Both of them were in their 80s, one a man, one a woman. They were neighbors. I don't know that they were close friends, but we knew that in both their cases they didn't have family nearby. For the elderly woman, family I think was back on the East Coast, and we didn't know if the elderly man had family at all. So we invited them to come over to our place for Thanksgiving dinner, thinking we're going to do them a favor, give them some company. And they both responded yes, and we said, well, we're also inviting the other, and they came. Now the woman, her name was Elma Rankin, and a delightful person. And the man's name was Homer Son. Equally delightful, but very different. Well, what happened? We shared the Thanksgiving dinner, and then we began to talk, and they began to tell their stories. Just one story after another, and we began to piece together their lives. Well, we found out that Elma Rankin, now in her mid-80s, her last job had been kind of the culmination of her career as a professional businesswoman, and she'd been like in the executive management of Nickerson Farms, which was originally started and based in Eldon, Missouri. And she knew the Nickersons. I think she called him Pop Nickerson, I believe, and had worked with them, had been a business manager for them, and told the stories of what that company had been like. He had originally been a part of the Stuckey's operation, then went out on his own, and the business only lasted for about 20 years, but it became an icon of American thoroughfares, and she was just in the thick of that. Well, we listened to her stories of her career and all of that, and fascinating. Well, Homer Son then told his story. He was a construction worker as a young man and actually helped on some of the construction at Bagnell Dam at Lake of the Ozarks. In particular, he was building the concrete platforms on which they put these towers to hold the electric cables coming out of the dam. And when that job was finished in the early 40s, during World War II, he went to work up in Washington State at a U.S. facility called the Hanford plant. And I think it was about 1943 or so when that plant had opened. And Homer said we were working there, all of us young men, and it was top secret. We had a dormitory. We were not able to leave the facility. We couldn't communicate with family back home. And it went on and on. He said the work was fine, but he began to notice that other young men were getting sick. And they would get very sick, and then they were just taken away. And they were never told what was going on. And Homer said that he got fearful, and he was afraid of what was happening. And so one night, he escaped. He just left the facility, hitchhiked, bought a car, and drove to Alaska. Now we're talking in the 40s, during World War II, drove to Alaska and hid out in Alaska and stayed up there for nearly 40 years, afraid that if he came back to the 48 states that someone would be watching for him because he left that facility. And I'm listening to this story, and of course then he tells of all of his adventures in Alaska, living in the woods and almost survival and hunting bear and fishing. And I knew something about the Hanford plant, and I told Homer, says, well, I know what you were doing. It was a part of the Manhattan Project. It was the development of atomic weapons. They were working with radioactivity. And of course that's what's happening. And a lot of that was highly top secret. And today that plant is closed, and it's been now sort of a toxic waste situation. And so Homer said, well, I never knew. And of course, all of those years he was afraid that the government would show up and take him away. Well, as we listened to both Homer's story and to Elma's story, we just became so grateful ourselves that they had shared their stories, their wisdom, and here we thought we were doing a good deed, and indeed they were sharing with us the richness of their life stories, and we were the ones saying, wow, thanks for your lives, for your stories, for sharing that bit of your life with us.
You know, that's a beautiful story, Larry, but it goes to show that our senior citizens have so much to offer all of us.
Yes, we do, Paul.
That's right. We are senior citizens.
Here I am thinking about, these elderly people in their 80s, and I'm going, those people aren't so elderly anymore.
No. And when you're in your 70s, now you think you're still a kid, but I remember when I was in my 30s, I thought, boy, 70, that's pretty old.
And I would hope, that now those folks that are 30, 40, and 50 years younger than us would go, oh, your life story is so interesting and so valuable, and thanks for sharing. I would hope that too.
Right. That's a beautiful story. Have you told that story before?
Oh, here and there, but I know not as a formal story.
That's a beautiful story, especially for Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Larry.
Oh, you're welcome.
If people want to hear more of your stories or your songs, what do they do?
Oh, just contact me at brownstory@hotmail.com.
brownstory@hotmail.com. Do you have any events?
Well, I'm going to be, I'll be sharing at the Senior Center. I'm going to be at the Adult Day Connection. I'm going to be with...
all here in Columbia?
All here in Columbia for seasonal stories, yes.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Larry Brown, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure having you here. And happy Thanksgiving to you and yours.
Happy Thanksgiving, Paul.
Okay. When we're in our 70s, we are senior citizens. All right. Tomorrow, Debbie Parker, Center for English Language Program, our guest. Have yourself a happy Thanksgiving. Something you'd like to hear or see, drop me an email, pepperp@missouri.edu. Bye-bye.